Stairs? I don't know what is happening in the woods outside of my house, but I am terrified. My best friend Easton and I went into the woods yesterday around 4:30 p.m. to look for my brother's football. He came crying to me a day prior because he accidentally threw it into the tree line. I don't blame him for going in there. He has been terrified of the woods ever since he was a boy. One day he ran into our house bawling to our parents because a man with allegedly no face had grabbed him and tried to pull him into the woods. I felt bad, so Easton, a friend who was staying over, and I went into these woods to find it. I knew we should have wandered past the first few trees. We didn't see it anywhere, so we should have turned around. But Easton wanted to explore, and I hate saying no to him because that kid can hold a grudge. I would have much rather dealt with his grudge. We walked farther and farther into the woods until I got far too uncomfortable. I told him we needed to leave. We turned back, and on the way, I began to feel uneasy. I have a gift when it comes to knowing what is and what is not a bad situation. As we wandered back, I noticed something ahead that stopped me. It was a staircase. I don't know what in the hell it was doing there, and just the sight of it made me uncomfortable. It screamed, "Stay away." As soon as Easton saw the stairs, he ran over to them smiling. He cursed in amazement and looked at me. The stairs were old and wooden. They looked like somebody cut them perfectly out of an old house and planted them in the middle of the woods. I told Easton that I wanted to go, and he shook his head, telling me to stop being a bitch. I'm not going to lie to you, as soon as I saw the stairs I wanted to climb them. I had the sudden urge, despite how creepy they were. I could stop myself, but I couldn't stop Easton. He began to climb the steps even after I told him not to. As soon as he was about halfway up, he turned and began talking. He told me to grow a pair and to get up there. I responded by telling him I felt sick, and he looked at me in total confusion. He then proceeded to ask me what I had just said. Considering that I had yelled it at him, I naturally assumed he was messing with me. I repeated myself, and he told me to stop. He was getting angry. I asked what he was talking about, and he began freaking out and smacking his ears. At this point, I knew we had to leave. I went to grab him, but as soon as I got near the step, a loud ear-picking sound started blasting through the air. I live near a train track, so I know loud, and trust me when I say that this was probably the loudest noise I have ever heard. It was a whistling, like the noise a wiffle ball would make flying through the air times 1,000. It hurt me so goddamn much I fell to the ground in pain. It lasted for about a minute before it finally went away, and I was bawling. My head was killing me. I got up and began telling Easton that we had to leave, but I was interrupted by what I saw. Nothing. The fucking stairs and Easton had disappeared. I spun around twice, thinking I got turned around, and called his name 1,000 times before running back to my house crying. I told my parents everything, and they called the police. As soon as they arrived, I told them everything, and they began looking for Easton. I gave them the number of Easton's house phone, and I even offered to take them to the spot. They called the number, and I have never been more confused. It wasn't his parents that picked him up. The police set me down with my parents later that night and began telling me that Easton Myers wasn't real. I freaked the fuck out and ran to my room. I had a picture of Easton and 3 of my other friends. I opened my junk drawer and grew desperate when I found the photo and saw that Easton was gone. I checked social media as well and even went to his house. According to Facebook, he never existed, and his house was owned by completely different people. There was not one goddamn trace of Easton Myers, and apparently, I was suffering from symptoms of, and I quote, extreme loneliness and depression. My parents are taking me to a goddamn doctor. I know he was real. I need help. Please. If there is any kind of urban legend or myth about stairs, I need help. I am not crazy. Any help would be appreciated. I don't want to end up in an asylum. knife-wielding psycho. I'm writing this as my girlfriend tells me the story, so these will be her words pretty much. My job is just to type and try not to screw up too much. When I was 12 years old, I spent the night with my best friend Carrie. We had big plans for our sleepover. We were planning to stay up all night, listen to music, play board games and talk about boys. The usual things little girls do. Around 2 a.m., after her parents were sleeping, we decided we were hungry. We knew we had to be quiet so that we didn't wake them, so we tiptoed into the hallway from her room. As we made our way into the kitchen, we had to go through the dining room. Because we were so quiet, we heard a tapping noise. Immediately we both knew that someone was tapping on the living room window. You could see into the living room from the dining room, so immediately our heads turned towards the living room. We could see a figure standing on the porch next to the window. Because of the way the porch light was illuminating the figure, it looked like a shadow. We thought the figure was Carrie's sister's boyfriend. The sister and boyfriend had been banned from seeing each other, and we assumed this was his weird way of getting her attention. We decided that either he would leave on his own, Tina, Carrie's sister, would see him, or Carrie's parents would wake up and run him off. We didn't want the last possibility to happen because we had already been told to go to sleep more than once, and we knew we'd get in trouble for sneaking into the kitchen for food when we were supposed to be asleep. As we walked through the dining room, the figure kept tapping at the window. When he came into full view, we knew for sure it was a man, and we could tell that he had a knife in his hand. The knife was what he was tapping with. Now, because this window had no shades, blinds, or curtains, we were sure he could see us as well. We both dropped to the floor and started crawling to the kitchen. When we made it to the kitchen, we sat in the middle of the kitchen floor, whispering about what we had just seen. We were both sure that we saw the same man with a knife. We knew we had to get to her parents' room as quickly as possible. To do this, we had to walk through the living room. We sat in the kitchen trying to figure out how we were going to get there without him seeing us. We peeked around the kitchen wall and could still see him standing on the front porch. We couldn't make it to her parents' room without him possibly seeing us. We knew we had to find a place that had a door that would lock in case he came in through the sliding glass door that currently had no lock since it was broken. The sliding glass door was in the dining room and right next to where we were. We decided to crawl back to her room. As we did, we heard the front door knob jiggling. We freaked. We crawled back to her room as fast as we could and locked the door. We crawled to her bedroom window that faced the street so that we could see if he was still on the front porch. We didn't see him. We didn't hear tapping either. As we were watching from her window, we saw him leave her yard and start walking up the street towards the main highway. I could see the knife shimmering off the streetlights. It was a huge butcher's knife. When we realized he was leaving, we ran into her parents' room to tell them what happened. We told them what we had seen, and due to our overactive imaginations and hundreds of stories that freaked us out before, they didn't believe us. We reluctantly went back to her bedroom and locked the door. We ended up sleeping on the floor, hidden by the bed from any windows in her room. The next morning was a Sunday. Carrie's dad always walked to the corner store up the street to get paper, coffee, and smokes. When he came back, he was empty-handed. He said the store was roped off with police tape, and it turned out the clerk in the store had been stabbed to death. So, knife-tapping psycho, let's not meet. The scream. I like to go for walks in the dark. I am not sure if this is strange or if everybody does it, but it just makes everything really creepy. Now for some information. I live in a well-civilized area with a lot of friends who live extremely close to me. Around 2 kilometers from my house is a heavily wooded area, and I like to follow a 4-wheel drive track when I go for my walks. Okay, time for the story. It was around 9:30 p.m. on a Friday, and I was going for a walk down the 4-wheel drive track when I heard a very light scream in the distance. I assumed it was just some kids playing, so I kept walking until I heard it again. At this point I knew someone was in trouble. I ran for my life hoping that I could help this person. I ran for about 100 meters when I came to the end of the track and looked around. One of the first things I saw was a girl about 19 years old being held by a 40-year-old looking man. When the man saw me, he dropped the girl and legged it around the corner. I sprinted over to the woman who was busy crying, shaken up. Anyway, to cut to the chase, we ended up calling the police and they came and took my statement and brought the girl home. I am glad that I still go for my walks. If I didn't, a girl would probably not be here today. Something watching in the dark. This happened the other night and I'm admittedly still terrified by it. For some context, I work an early shift and have to be up at 4 in the morning, so this all happened sometime between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. I'd gone to bed early and found myself asleep after a while, having strange and unnerving dreams, all of which I'd forgotten the details of but were your garden variety unpleasant dreams and paled in comparison to what happened when I woke up. I woke up to a suffocating feeling, a tightness in my chest where my heart was pounding. Now, an important thing to know about me is that when I'm exhausted, I couldn't care less about anything. I once thought my beloved childhood hamster had escaped but was so tired I couldn't get up to make sure the cat couldn't get him. He wasn't in danger, but the point is I was too tired to care about the most important thing in my life at the time. When I'm tired enough, even the fact that I can hardly breathe isn't enough to alarm me, so even though my chest was tight and the air was difficult to inhale or exhale, I remained calm. I lay there on my pack, hands against my pillow by my face, my limbs frozen in an X figure, like being pinned down. I grumbled a bit to myself sleepily as I blinked awake, unsure if it was time to get up for work. The moonlight was shining through my curtains just enough to dimly light the room with a blue glow. My eyes adjusted quickly to this lighting as I slowly panned my room for signs of what could have woken me up. My rabbit, Sir Runt, was sound asleep in his cage, as was my turtle Herc, and there was no sign of any of the cats having pushed their way in through the closed door. When I finally lolled my head to look upwards, ready to go back to sleep, I saw it. Hovering above my bed was a solid black mass in the form of a male about 5 feet 8 inches or 5 feet 9 inches. He had short hair that jutted out some as if tousled, his arms were down at his sides, slightly out, and his toes slightly bent. He looked as if he'd just begun to lift off the bed or had been paused, mind bouncing on the mattress, leaning towards me at about a 45-degree angle. My first thought, still half asleep and foggy-brained as I looked at the boyish shadow, like that of a teenager, was, why is Peter Pan in my room? Or his shadow? Ridiculous, I know. I'm a 20-year-old woman and here I am half asleep with a thing hovering above me, and I go right to cartoon characters. But again, I was exhausted from a double, almost triple shift of work that day and still half asleep. A more alert part of my mind, starting to clear from the haze of sleep only a fraction of a second later, echoed a sobering thought. In the same tone of dread you'd share bad, slightly unnerving news, a voice in my head simply reminded me, you're an adult. The instant I thought this, my eyes flew open wide. I don't know what it was about this unnervingly calm statement in my subconscious that did it, but this snapped me wide awake. I've never felt so alert before in my life, or so terrified. The thing had bad vibes rolling off it in waves. I couldn't grasp what I was seeing, but I knew two things were undeniable as I gaped at it. I was awake and this thing was there, real. My mind moved a mile a minute. My first thought was of the unpleasant dreams I'd been having. There's an old legend about something that sits on a sleeping person's chest and brings nightmares. It's where the word comes from. This legend was my first guess as to what I was seeing, though I immediately ruled it out. I managed to force myself to slide about half a centimeter away from it, almost involuntarily gasping no as I stared. I saw a flash of 2 red dots where my eyes should be as I yanked the blanket over my head, regaining my limbs. I lay in the dark-eyed and gasping, trembling as I tried to figure out what had been hovering over me in my sleep. I knew whatever it was wasn't good, and I refused to risk a peek from under the blanket, lest it still be there. I've experienced a lot of scary things in my relatively short life, from stalkers to wannabe kidnappers, stories for another time perhaps, but nothing has ever scared me like this thing. Whatever that was, a shadow person, a demon, sleep paralysis, or whatever the hell else it could be, I hope it never comes back. We all like to think if we ever encountered something dark and possibly supernatural that we'd handle it with a level head, realizing the danger and hop on the first nope train to fuck thatville and get away. That's not always what happens. What are you supposed to do when you're trapped between a mattress and something watching in the dark? I always liked scary stories, urban legends and myths, but I never wanted to live in one, to be a first-hand account of something like that. It's so hard to explain. I just hope it never happens again. I know most people won't believe me, but I know this happened. I don't think I could forget if I tried. I just needed to share th. Graveyard Shift Ghost Stories. My store is haunted. Laugh if you will, but being an overnighter, I see plenty of fairly unexplainable events. I'm a reasonable person. Yes. I believe in many different supernatural entities, however, I'm also aware that physics is pretty weird in itself. If I can explain something away with logic, I will. It makes the weird things I do see, I don't know, less prevalent, therefore less creepy? I'm not sure, I just know the less I see of the supernatural, the better off my day-to-day mindset is. Now, I've worked the first, second and third shifts at my store. I've been there a depressingly long time for how short my life has been. The store and its employees are great, but retail is a bitch. I've only ever noticed the weird and creepy in the dark, quiet hours of the night, generally only when there are just the employees in the store. I don't know if it's because things like stuff flying off the shelves at random always seem to have a logical explanation when the store is crowded, or if it's because our ghosts only come out at night. Time of day seems like a ridiculous condition to impose on the dead. As previously mentioned, at night things like to fly off the shelves at random. On my very first week of full-time overnights, I remember hearing a very loud ruckus coming from the back of the store. I went to go look at what had happened to find one bottle out of a package of our nutritional shakes, broken and leaking everywhere, at the opposite end of the aisle. Just for reference, that's a good 28 feet in difference. It was like someone had plucked it out of the package and tossed it towards the front of the aisle. No one had entered the store in a little over an hour. We had no pharmacy waiters, not that it would have taken my pharmacist an hour to fill a script, no time wasters, no teenagers, or long shopping customers in the store. Just the employees. My manager had been in the office doing paperwork. The door leading into the office is heavy. I can hear it close from the opposite side of the store, and when I poked my head into the office to find him, there he was, hunched over the store's cash reports. He had asked me what I needed when I walked into the office. I told him what happened and shrugged and said, rather nonchalantly, "Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure the store is haunted by several things. Most people here think I'm crazy. They seem mostly benign, if occasionally annoying." Mostly benign? Another shrug. There's one that likes to watch people. I get the feeling I'm being watched all the time here in the office. A few other people have noticed it at night too. The break room is worse. I've also had some pretty nasty, weird near misses. I soon found out what he meant. Things firmly planted behind a guard would end up 2 aisles over. Keeping holiday merchandise on the risers in the wee hours is a nightmare, and when I got promoted I noticed the feeling of being watched while I was in the office as well, except I'd get it in the stockroom and the back hallway by the break room and bathrooms as well. Things you set down in the stockroom would end up in the photo lab, when you hadn't been in the lab all night. Sometimes stuff would go missing altogether. I had a set of keys that you could see me very clearly set down on the counter in the cameras in the store. When I looked back at our records, you never saw anyone pick them back up or even approach the area at the time I left them there. They just disappeared. Then the truly creepy things started happening. Things started flying at me. Once I had an alarmingly tall stack of 2 liters almost fall on Main. Cleaning up that mess was a nightmare and took way too long. Things set solidly and levelly on the top of the middle deck would teeter in my direction. Ladders, which had been planted flat and firmly on the ground, would shift precariously. I've had too many close calls to count. Once, while pulling stock in the back, the ladder shuddered and felt like it was about to tip over, sideways. I lost my foothold and stumbled down several steps, my heart racing. I eventually caught myself on the overstock bay I'd been pulling crap out of, but not before I caught my wrist on one of the edges on the way down. It stopped my momentum, but broke my wrist. Another moment was when I was on our tallest ladder putting things up top for storage. I set the box I was carrying down and the ladder lurched forward and began to tip over. My brain short-circuited and I reacted before I could think past, dying at work is a miserable way to go. I jumped a couple of feet from the ladder to the middle deck. Stunned, I turned around and watched as the ladder clattered to the ground. When my brain caught up to what happened, I sat down on the middle deck, shaking. Somehow my cashier hadn't managed to hear the noise and I'd had to call the front of the store with my cell phone when I finally managed to calm down. She laughed at me for being clumsy and I didn't.